Hello, everybody. I am Jax James, NORML's State Policy Manager, and I'm here today to talk to you guys about some exciting news that has come through this week. We now officially know what ballot items will be on the ballot in November, and so I wanted to give you guys some updates on that because there has been some big news in Oklahoma and Arkansas this week. So as always, I like to see where you guys are watching from, so please drop where you're watching from in the comments so that I can check and see if there's any legislation rolling near you. So let me go ahead and open up my handy dandy note page. You guys know I got to have notes to be able to do all the things, right? So let's start in Oklahoma. So if you have been following in Oklahoma, Oklahoma submitted their signatures, had them verified, but they were extremely delayed in the verification process because they used a new private vendor to help them with that. And so because of that, there was a lawsuit filed and a decision officially came down regarding this Oklahoma legalization initiative. Unfortunately, the ballot will not appear on the 2022 November ballot this November, but it will appear on a future ballot. At this time, it will be up to the governor to set a special election. Now, the governor could set a special election for any time in 2023 or 2024. And if the governor decides to take no action in Oklahoma, it would automatically be on the ballot in November of 2024. There's a couple things that the governor can choose to do. He can also do a snap special election, which only gives 70 days notice. So there's a few different options as to what can happen in Oklahoma. So stay tuned. But sometime between 2023 and 2024, in Oklahoma, you will be able to vote on legalization. In addition, there are other efforts in the 2023 and 2024 years in Oklahoma for legalization, in Idaho for medical, and Wyoming for medical and decriminalization, and in Florida for legalization. So we already know that we can expect to be following at least 5 different efforts in 23 and 24. But let's talk about what is on the ballot now, today. What states and localities are going to be able to vote on different marijuana measures. So the big news this week was out of Arkansas. The Arkansas Supreme Court issued a decision ensuring that a statewide measure to legalize adult cannabis use in Arkansas would appear on the November ballot. So state officials had verified that the proponents had gathered the numbers of signatures required from registered voters, but then the Board of Elections Commissioners denied that the measure's proposed ballot title was effective, opining that it didn't accurately reflect the scope of the initiative and that some elements of the proposal might be confusing to voters. So the group Reasonable Growth Arkansas, which is led by former Arkansas Democratic House Minority Leader Eddie Armstrong, filed a lawsuit with the state Supreme Court to challenge that decision from the Board of Elections Commissioners. So yesterday, the judges ruled in the favor of Responsible Growth Arkansas, deciding, quote, respondents and interveners have not met their burden of proving that the ballot title is insufficient. It is for the people, not this court, to exercise the right to amend the Constitution. And our court must continue to preserve this first power of the people of Arkansas by not supplanting their decision with ours. So super important decision that has come out of Arkansas, and the ballot measure will allow those 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis, but it doesn't permit for home cultivation, and it doesn't contain certain provisions to expunge past records or to provide social equity for applicants. So it does lay a great groundwork, but of course, as with almost any legislation or ballot initiative that passed, there will be further tweaking to continue to improve the program once in place. So, we've got 2-1 Arkansans support this idea of legalizing marijuana. So we're hopeful that Arkansas will join the 19 other states in DC that already have adult use marijuana markets. So Now that we know about Arkansas and Oklahoma, we are set on what is going to be happening. So in addition to Arkansas, we've also got the effort in Maryland. So lawmakers approved legislation. This is through a referendum process, which is different than the ballot initiative. Ballot initiative, you collect signatures. A referendum goes through the legislative process first. So lawmakers approved this constitutional amendment. It's going to be called Question 4. And it will ask, do you favor the legalization of the use of cannabis by individuals who are at least 21 years of age or older after July 1st, 2023 in the state of Maryland? State lawmakers kind of had a bundle package. So they had a complementary legislation that kind of outlined, possession limits, facilitation of automatic expungement, and some other details that they wanted to have vetted out to go in conjunction with this in anticipation that it will pass. So if approved by voters, adults will be able to permit up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis or 12 grams of concentrates beginning in July of 2023. Possessing between 1.5 ounces and 2.5 ounces would be subject to civil fines, while the possession of greater quantities would still be subject to existing penalties. Lawmakers would then have to go back to enact additional legislation next session to establish the rest of the rules and regulations that would govern this regulated marketplace in Maryland. Additionally, there's a citizens initiative in Missouri. It's going to be on the ballot as Amendment 3, and it's sponsored by Legal Missouri 2022, which is spearheaded by Missouri NORML. And it's going to seek to allow those 21 and older to possess, purchase, consume, and cultivate marijuana, all while allowing those with nonviolent marijuana offenses to automatically expunge their nonviolent criminal records. The proposed measure also seeks to broaden industry participation to include small business owners, disadvantaged populations, and this includes those with limited capital, residents of high poverty communities, service-disabled veterans, and those who have been previously convicted of these nonviolent marijuana offenses. Additionally, the initiative makes some improvements on the state's existing medical marijuana access program. Moving on to the Dakotas, we've got both North and South Dakota. So in North Dakota, New Approach North Dakota is spearheading this ballot initiative to legalize the adult use and sale of cannabis that would allow 21 and up to possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis and cultivate 3 plants in their home. It would also establish retail cannabis stores, product manufacturers, testing laboratories, and other types of cannabis businesses. Further, it directs regulators that they have to establish and implement their rules by October 1st, 2023. Now, in South Dakota, if you've been following historically, you know that this is the second consecutive election where voters in South Dakota will decide on a ballot measure to legalize marijuana for 21 and up. Representatives from the group South Dakotans for Better Marijuana Laws said that the Secretary of State confirmed that advocates had secured their ballot access, and this measure would allow adults to possess up to 1 ounce and to cultivate up to 3 mature plants without remuneration if you transfer it between adults. But the measure does not seek to establish a regulatory framework governing the licensed production or retail sale of marijuana. Now, this year, there are actually quite a few local efforts that are going on across the country. The first one I want to touch on is in Colorado Springs. Voters in Colorado Springs will decide on a pair of local ordinances. The first will determine whether or not the city's existing medical cannabis dispensaries will transition into adult use retailers. And the second asks voters to approve a 5% local tax on sales involving adult use marijuana products. Now, there's an effort in Lapeer, Michigan that we do oppose. It would so voters in Lapeer will decide on a measure that seeks to repeal existing marijuana regulations. And if passed, it is likely that it would shut down the current operating dispensaries in the city. Additionally, in Petoskey, Michigan, voters will decide on a municipal ordinance that seeks to overturn the ban that's currently in place. And if passed, it will call upon lawmakers to provide for standards and procedures to permit and regulate such establishments. Now, in Granite County, Montana, there is 3 different marijuana-related initiatives. One would repeal this county-wide moratorium prohibiting adult use sales in the county, and the other one would impose a new tax on both medical and adult use products. Now, you heard earlier that I mentioned that The Ohio initiative effort has been postponed to 2023 or 2024. However, there is continuing to be work at the local level. Over the better part of a decade, voters in over 24 municipalities in Ohio have favored local ballot measures that depenalize the personal possession of marijuana. This year, efforts with the Sensible Movement Coalition and NORML Appalachia have successfully petitioned to place the question before voters and seek to eliminate penalties in the following towns: Corning, Helena, Hemlock, Kent, Laurelville, Rushville, and Shawnee. Now, in Rhode Island, as you guys know, just back in May, state lawmakers legalized this adult use market, and the law provides the localities with the ability to weigh on if they want to permit or prohibit licensed marijuana markets in their community. So voters in almost 40 different cities and communities will decide on ballot measures on election day specific to allowing these businesses to operate in their towns. Voters will decide yes or no on the following question: will new cannabis-related licenses be issued in that municipality to businesses involved in cultivation, manufacturing, laboratory testing, and retailing of adult recreational use cannabis? Communities that vote no will not be eligible to receive any revenue generated from state licensed marijuana sales. Now, in my home state of Texas, as you may know, in Texas, the only way to change our marijuana laws is through the legislature, which meets every 2 years for 140 days. However, we've seen localities using discretion in implementing first chance programs, diversion programs, and more. Additionally, there are certain cities that are known as home rule cities, and they can pass any regulation or law that they deem necessary unless it is specifically prohibited by state law. So Ground Game Texas is working in several of these home rule cities across Texas to depenalize the personal possession of cannabis. Earlier this year in my city of Austin, Proposition A was overwhelmingly passed, and this depenalized marijuana possession and prohibited police from executing no-knock warrants. Now, of course, it is important that I point out this effort in these different cities would only govern that city's police department. Of course, sheriffs and DPS would still be able to arrest if you came in contact with them. But in Texas, in November, the following cities will be able to decide on these measures to eliminate the enforcement of low-level marijuana offenses: Denton, Elgin, Harker Heights, Killeen, and San Marcos. So we have a lot of stuff happening in Texas. Nice to be able to kind of get around having to wait on the legislature and get a little bit more push at the local level. Of course, this does create a patchwork of policy, which can be confusing for people. And of course, as I mentioned, it is only over the local police department, not sheriffs or DPS. But of course, in Texas, we'll take what we can get. So if you live in those cities, please make sure that you're registered to vote so that you can join Austin in depenalizing the possession of marijuana. So I'm going to come over to the comments and see if you guys have any questions. But before I do, I wanted to let you know that you can find out all the details on this at norml.org/elections. In addition to that, we have been steadily working on Smoke the Vote. We rolled it out a couple weeks ago. And as more candidates are being added to the system and more candidates are filling out our questionnaire, we're continuing to update those for you. So please make sure that you tune in and check out where your state stands on the issue. And lastly, if you want to take some action today to do something, you can go to norml.org/act. And at the top there, you're going to be able to see about 5 or 6 different federal level actions that we would love to have you participate in. There has been a little bit of movement at the federal level, and so continuing to apply pressure is extremely important. And then lastly, I wanted to let you guys know that, of course, there are chapters in many of us states across the country. So if you are not already engaged with a chapter, go to norml.org/chapters, click on your state and see where you can connect with one near you. Now, there are a few states that we do not have chapters. So of course, there's information on if you would like to start your own. So coming over to the comments real quick, we've got some people from Illinois and El Paso, Virginia, Florida. I see Scott is watching. Hi, Scott. I don't see any questions though, so I'm going to assume I did a real good job of explaining it. But again, we're really excited to see these states and local areas addressing these important issues. For those of you that are watching from Texas, of course, our legislative session is going to be starting in January. So get ready, because just 6 days after the November election in Texas, our newly elected legislators are able to start filing legislation. So we will be hitting the ground running. Make sure everyone that is watching today is registered to vote. If you live in a state where one of these measures is occurring, you can't vote for it if you're not registered. And those deadlines are approaching in many states. Usually it's around mid-October. So you have less than a month to register to vote. And let's see, I feel like there was something else I was going to say about voting. Nope, I don't know. I talked about smoke the vote. I talked about registering to vote. I talked about learning about where your candidates stand and about the issues and efforts in your state. Get connected with those chapters. And also, just to let you know, NORML is one of the only consumer and patient-based advocacy organizations. All of our funding comes from our membership and our donors like you. And so if you support our mission, I encourage you to either click the link to donate or click the link to join, so that you can make sure to adequately help us build up for the upcoming legislative session. So on that note, friends, it has been lovely to give you the good news that Arkansas will be on the ballot. It's extremely exciting. I was starting to get a little nervous with how long we were having to wait, and glad to hear that Oklahoma will be on the ballot, although it will be at a future date. So those were the big developments this week, and I look forward to being back here with you guys next week to discuss what else might be going on. All right, guys, till next time, I hope you have a safe and wonderful weekend. Signing off.